We're going to talk about how to coordinate two main muscles of our trunk, our diaphragm, which sits at the base of our rib cage, and our pelvic floor muscles, which is a group of muscles at the base of the pelvic area. Now, when we inhale and when we exhale, those two muscle groups have to coordinate together kind of synchronously. If they don't coordinate together very well, or if they don't fully move the way we want them to move, then that can cause problems, especially when it comes to the pelvic floor. For example, incontinence, urinary incontinence, or basically leaking when you're jumping or lifting heavy. So when we coordinate those two, we're going to start with the squat. That's kind of a good foundational place to start. We want to coordinate it with breath. Our diaphragm is a respiratory muscle, and so when we breathe, it naturally has to contract and relax. So when we come into the squat, when we come into the depth of the squat, we're going to inhale through the nose with a closed mouth, and then exhale on the way up, exhaling through pursed lips. That's going to help those two muscles coordinate together. So again, inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up. Now what happens with those two muscles or muscle groups is when we inhale, those two muscles contract downward, or the pelvic floor muscles descend a little bit, and then the opposite happens simultaneously when we exhale. So as we exhale or as we come up from the squat, the opposite happens. So there's a little bit of an excursion up and down that happens. So again, inhaling in on the way down, and then exhaling out on the way up. And it can be helpful to visualize those two movements happening. That's a really good place to start when it comes to training the pelvic floor and training the trunk, especially as a precursor to more demanding or dynamic movements like jumping, running, squat jumps. So we're gonna tie that to jumping. Same idea, we're gonna inhale, and then exhale on basically what is the more challenging part of the movement, or the landing part. So when we land, our pelvic floor muscles need to be able to do their job to prevent any leaking. So what that looks like, I'll demonstrate this with a jump roping motion. So I'm going to inhale before I jump, and then you can do this one of two different ways. If you're jump roping, for example, you can either do a continuous exhale as you're jumping, or you can exhale in short bursts. Doing this in a continuous exhale can be a good place to start, and then as you feel comfortable with that, then doing it in bursts. So what that looks like is this. So that's version 1. Version 2 with a short burst of an exhale. So again, by coordinating the breath, you're helping the pelvic floor contract the way we want it to prevent any leaking. Same thing goes for running. Now when you're running, it's very helpful to keep your rib cage stacked on top of your pelvis. So when you run, especially as you get tired, so it's normal to have a forward lean. You do want a forward lean when you're running, because when we're running, we're basically continuously falling and catching ourselves. However, especially as you get fatigued, you don't want that forward lean to turn into kind of an over arch to where the low back is really arched, more so than what we want. We want the rib cage to be stacked on top of the pelvis. So even though I'm in a forward lean here, you can see my rib cage is still directly over my pelvis. So I'm not shifting from this position to over exaggerated. Again, same thing goes for jumping. If we're jumping rope, for example, being nice and upright and vertical so that we're not way out here, rib cage flared. That makes it a whole lot harder for those two muscles to coordinate together and contract the way we want them to contract. Now, one last example when it comes to more dynamic movement is a box jump, or just a jump. Let's do an air squat. So same idea, just like the squat, we want to inhale on the way down, and then exhale on landing. So it doesn't matter if you're doing an air squat or a box jump, same idea with the box jump. As you land on the box, then that's when you're gonna exhale, so that again, pelvic floor recoils and does its job to prevent any leaking. So again, what that looks like is this. Exhale on impact. Rule of thumb, exhale on the harder part of the movement. That's going to make pelvic floor do its job.